Okay, hello everyone. We've gone for a bit of a different track today on the MAT Finance Show. So normally we are very boring, very deep focused on MAT Finance operations and kind of strategic financial planning. Today is a bit different because over the past 6 months, I've been hearing more about this topic, but certainly over the last month, it's been really brought to the front of my thoughts around some articles that I saw in Schools Week around malware attacks in education settings. So this discussion is really geared around a bit of a introduction to malware encounters, what's happening, what they look like, what you can do about them. And I've been very kindly joined by Mark Orchison, who is the founder and CEO at Nine, who is an expert in this space. So I'm going to be playing the role of, I don't know if simpleton's the right word, but less knowledgeable on cyber. And Mark's kindly joined. So Mark, I wonder if you could introduce yourself and Nine for our viewers, please.
Yeah, perfect. So my name is Mark Orchison. I'm the founder and CEO of Nine. We are a technology consultancy based in the UK, but we have operations globally. We have a team in North America. We have a team in India, and we support schools in the UK and internationally on their data privacy, their cybersecurity, and their safeguarding. So as an organization, we bring a lot of experience and expertise across all of those different disciplines to support schools and multi-academy trusts in lowering their risk profile in data privacy, cybersecurity, and safeguarding.
So cybersecurity. So in the last month, I saw in Schools Week 3 multi-academy trusts, and these are established multi-academy trusts, have been hit with malware attacks.
Yeah.
What's going on? What's happening, and why does it seem to be more frequent? Is that a change, or has it always been happening? They're just
it's changed over the past 12 months. So if you look from what Microsoft published a tracker of malware encounters, and certainly since around August of last year, 62% of total malware encounters are focused within the vertical of education, where this time last year, in February, so I should say February last year was about 20%. And if you just think about the pandemic, the core industry that every government was trying to continue was that of education. But within a school, you no longer have the children and you don't have the teachers within the school. They are generally at home, working from their home computers or the home internet. And they don't have the protections that a school would typically have in terms of its the security with all the students and all the staff within the school. And that's what's called the attack surface. So the attack surface of the school has increased significantly. And then you've got the school IT staff. The school IT staff are very much focused on ensuring a distance learning program can operate rather than ensuring that the security protections are there. So all that added together, the schools are ripe for the picking. And as a cyber attacker, I'm looking for, the path of least resistance and who's going to pay out. And who's going to pay out is a school that needs to be ready or is delivering a distance learning program that if it doesn't, then the reputational damage is significant. So I'm going to target schools.
So is that, do you think that's a temporary blip just in reaction to obviously what's happened in the last 12 months? Or do you think there's an element of opportunity that's happened in that period, but actually schools are seen as a soft target?
I think we're at the very beginning of a peak. And that is because within schools, most IT staff do not understand cybersecurity. And that's not saying that cybersecurity is difficult to understand. It's that a lot of organizations overcomplicate the term cybersecurity. So it's deemed scary. And IT staff don't necessarily have the tools or the resources to be able to put in place the protections that are required to manage the cybersecurity threats. And also what you're seeing is because attackers have now found their way into school IT systems, and school IT systems are very different to the commercial world, right? So they're much more complex. But if you understand how those systems go together and you have that knowledge, it's very easy then for you to break into the next one and then the next one and the next one. And because they pay out on a regular basis, then that's where your money is.
So let's go back to what is a malware. This is me going into simpleton mode. It's a big stretch for me, as you can imagine. What's a malware attack?
Well, if you just open up your email and click on the link I sent you.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Put in my
So,
password.
yeah, a malware can come into a variety of different forms. But in its simplest form, let's say this: you've got a teacher that is looking for some decent resources online to support with a distance learning class, and they download a file from the internet, opening it up on their laptop, and it could be a Word file or it could even be a video, but embedded within those Word files or those videos is a program that is trying to compromise the PC that the teacher is working on. That PC could be the school's owned PC, or it could be their own PC. Now, in order for that sort of that malware, or historically would have been known as a virus, in order for that the virus to not be able to replicate itself on the machine or be able to get access to that PC would need to have the most up-to-date antivirus on it from known malwares, and it would need to have a level of controls to ensure that the teacher didn't have what's called administrator access to the machine, and therefore could execute specific programs. Now, in many cases, the school IT systems haven't been set up to remotely push antivirus programs to teachers' laptops. So whilst they're at home and malwares are being created or are developing, the longer that the teacher is out of the school, the more out of date their laptop is, and even their home laptop or home PC that needs to have antivirus on it for it to be working. So essentially, what tends to happen is that that laptop or that PC will get compromised, and then let's say it's compromised at home. You've been working at home. You then take your laptop into school, and you go into school and you go to log on, and you've already got your malware on your computer, but then the malware can have access to the school network. And if you've got what's called a flat network, so no VLANs, the malware can see your servers, and then essentially it's like a spider crawling through the school network until it finds something else it can compromise, and essentially can then create a back door for the cyber attacker to then to snoop around, to see what files can be encrypted, to see what other systems it can compromise, and then essentially encrypt either systems or devices to say, you can no longer, like your finance system. Quite often we'll see a finance system encrypted, and they'll say, okay, we've encrypted your finance system, or we've downloaded all these files, and you need to pay us $100,000 worth of Bitcoin in order to unencrypt those. So that is as simple as it is.
Wow. So is it the same risk with student laptops, or do they not bother? Does it still happen with student laptops as well, or because of their
access? Student laptops would be the same sort of threats. The level of access that malware can get when the laptop is returned to school depends how the IT infrastructure of the school is segmented. So if you have what's called access control lists on your switches, if you have VLANs on the network, then you have a greater or a lower level of risk. However, what we have seen in those instances is then the attacker compromise the email account of the students, and then, for example, send an email to Mr. Jordan and a variety of other teachers with a PDF, and in that PDF is an embedded malware, and then it compromises the the teacher's laptop, and teachers have a higher level of access than a student would, and consequently, the spider is going up. It's like snakes and ladders. Then it's all going up throughout the network. And from a member of from a school IT technician or even network manager is not necessarily going to know how to be structuring the networks to mitigate from those sorts of threats.
Okay, so it's obviously clever stuff, and that we've heard obviously a bit about it. How do people generally find out that this has happened to them? What's the first they hear that they're been subject to a malware attack?
Typically will be when their systems have been compromised and they've got a ransomware demand, and that could be something popping up on the computer, or them not being able to access specific systems or files. So it's at the point of demand when the ransomware is executed that then they'll find out. Now, when a cyber criminal does this, when they sort of execute the ransomware and they ask for the money, there won't be just one payload that they've executed on. There'll be a number of other like landmines throughout the school IT network. So, in the unlikely event that the school manages to overcome that one ransomware, there will be other ones waiting to be sort of tripped if necessary.
Wow. So I've just had a demand.
Yep.
I'm kind of visualizing a piece of paper with cutouts from a newspaper in terms of, right, paying 100,000 Bitcoin. What do these demands look like, and what do you do when you get a demand? What's your first action? Is there a kind of a mitigation step and then a fixing step, or
yeah? The first thing is to validate that it actually is a live demand, and you will soon know the extent of the issue. Now, how you respond to it depends on the nature of your IT systems. There's not necessarily like, well, if I give you a plan for another client who had the exact same malware, and maybe in an entirely different approach because their IT systems are architected in an entirely different way. So there's not necessarily you wouldn't necessarily do the same things. We have at Nine, we have an incident management process that enables you to quantify the issues and the extent of the security incident, so that then you can look to mitigate the damage, reduce the impact, contain it as far as you can. And contain it may include you pulling out the internet, telling every member of staff to turn off their computer, shutting down every different, every device, every printer, every network switch on the network, so you can contain the issue. Because it may be that if you contain it, for example, and it is like an on-prem on a server you had located on site, and that's been encrypted, that actually you have a backup of all the data. So you can just wipe that machine and restore everything from your backups. That is one way to mitigate the extent of the damage. It's still a security incident. It's still probably reportable to the ICO within the UK, but you have mitigated it because you're able to back up quickly because you have those backups ready to hand, and those backups are encrypted at rest, so that essentially they can be re-encrypted by a malware.
So is that kind of incident response service? I mean, obviously you guys offer it. Is that a thing that people offer and you'd expect trusts to be buying into, or would trusts kind of formulate these plans themselves, or a bit of both?
The National Cyber Security Centre in the UK, it's called the NCSC, has written a document for boards and governing bodies about what the expectations are for you as a multi-academy trust in terms of managing your cybersecurity risks. And included in that are the expectations around incident planning and incident management. So as a sort of FD of a trust, when you're looking at your total risk profile across your trust at this moment in time, cybersecurity should be there amongst a high or a critical level of risk, because we know that 62% of schools or 62% of malware encounters are within education. Data protection law requires you to understand what your highest level data privacy risks are, and to ensure your resources are directed at managing those risks. So if I'm an FD and I've got a DPO, which you will have, your DPO should be focused on supporting the organization to manage its cybersecurity risk, rather than, for example, doing a DPIA or looking at anything else or privacy notices, because the area where the greatest level of risk is on cybersecurity. And yet, as Nine as a service, we have tools, we have resources. The Nine app allows you to respond to and manage a cybersecurity incident as it takes place. So there are tools and there are resources. The biggest thing that an FD can be doing at the moment is quantifying the level of risk of its IT systems and services. And you do that through a cyber vulnerability assessment. So how vulnerable are we to a successful cyber attack? And that would then inform you, into the steps that you need to take to mitigate your cyber risk. And coming up to the school holidays of the summer, doing that now will give you a plan of activity that your IT team can do over the summer to really to sort of manage your cyber risk.
And where do you see, from your experience of being involved in lots of those,
Yeah.
is there things that are always coming out? So there's always these elements that are always increasing people's risks, or is it there's just no two sides the same?
Yeah. So half of the problems, so 50%, so you can reduce your cyber risk by 50%, based upon our research, by having regular update management of your systems, services, and devices, and in also ensuring that any end of life pieces of equipment are removed from the network. So we'll go into a school and we will find that there will be Microsoft Server 2003 or 2012 that are still connected to the network that are end of life, and those are systems that can be readily compromised. And if you compromise those servers, you can compromise the rest of your servers. If you think about, do you remember before the iPhones 5 years ago, you used to have little red dots on all the apps of your phone to say that it needs to be updated. The same goes for all of your printers, your scanners, your photocopiers, your door access control, your iPads, laptops. They all have little red dots. And many of those little red dots are security issues where the device needs to be updated because someone can easily, hack that device. And how to hack that device is you can search it on the internet. So what a hacker does, it will come in, it will find how many red dots you got across your network, and then individually compromise each of those different devices to sort of do the snakes and ladders up through the network. So you can remove that risk by having good update management, and that's very low cost. It doesn't cost anything really, just to make sure that your IT team understand how to update all the different devices, understand all the devices that need to be updated, and then do that. Another 25% of vulnerabilities fall within security misconfiguration. So this is where different components of the system's architecture are misconfigured, and that would allow a hacker to compromise it. So when, for example, if you've got a firewall and all your FTEs have multiple firewalls across their multi-carrier trusts, even when you'll do an update to that firewall or your filtering system, the update will more than likely, in many, I'd say probably 2 out of 3 times, will kick out of kilter the security configuration of that firewall. So many IT teams will update a firewall, for example, or a filtering system, and just say, okay, it's updated now, it's all fine, not knowing that the security configuration has changed, making that firewall less protected to the school network. So we find that ensuring that your configurations always remain the same is like for example, having your car serviced. You'd always make sure your car is serviced and has a change of oil, and that it functions correctly. When you've got an IT system, you need to do exactly the same. And then a further 10% can be reduced through effective credential management. So again, we'll look at a school network and we'll look at we'll find a UPS, and a UPS, for those that don't know, is connected to your servers and ensures that a consistent level of power gets to those servers. And if the power fails, there'll be a runtime to automatically switch off those servers so that you don't lose data. But many of those systems are put in with just default credentials like admin, or in the case of an APC UPS, APC. Now, if I can get hold of if I can see the UPS on the school network, and then I try the default credentials APC, I can then get control of the UPS, but then I can shut down all of your servers. But actually, also because your servers are connected to that UPS through a network card, I could probably get in the back of that server through the network card and take full control of those. So just in those 3 points there, that you've got update management, you've got security misconfiguration, and you've got the last one was credential management. You can reduce your security vulnerability by 85%, and do so at little or no cost to you as a school. You may need to pay for a cyber vulnerability assessment, and they are very low cost to do. But your IT team should be able to remediate all of those problems if they have them structured in a way that they would understand.
That was what I was going to ask. I mean, as you got into the depths there, I was thinking, oh wow, this sounds significant in terms of investment. But actually, this is kind of capabilities and tools that exist in many places already. It's just around being confident in the configuration of those, and that they've actually been reviewed and regularly kind of stress tested.
Yeah, and you'll see that like the rhetoric from the National Cybersecurity Centre. So the NCSE have created this document specifically for FDs of multi-academy trusts and for board members of multi-academy trusts. It basically says that cybersecurity is really easy to manage if you follow these steps. It's very, very low cost if you follow these steps. If you look at the Academy's financial handbook, the Academy's financial handbook references this document that you should be following to manage your risk, and the costs are minimal. The engineer, there is an amount of time that needs to be set aside for the IT team to do this work. And that's where, as an FD, you understanding the scope of the work is then managing all the other demands within the school for new devices, new systems, new platforms. Whilst you have this big gap of work that needs to be completed around cybersecurity. And like for us, a typical school, when we do a cyber vulnerability assessment, it's 4 or 5 days of work. Depending on the size of the school, it's between £3,000 and £5,000. It's not a huge amount of cost to reduce your level of risk from having a cyber attack that takes down not one school but 3 or 4 schools within your trust because of the interconnectedness of the systems.
Are you seeing that as a bigger, with a multi-academy trust, generally moving down the route of standardization throughout IT, whether that's Google, whether that's Microsoft? Is that making the problem, is it a higher risk because actually schools are getting more and more interconnected? Whereas I know, looking back not that many years, you had networks per schools, no interconnectivity in multi-academy trust, different domains. Is the fact that trusts are starting to operate more as a single entity, is that increasing the risk around this, or does that help?
No, it makes it easier. From like, if I can get into your school, Will, and either there's a member of staff that's associated with that network within the school because they also work at the trust, for example, or your school is connected through some sort of physical connection to another school. As soon as I'm into yours, I can try to route myself either through your own account to compromising your device, or through compromising the connected link to that other school. So it makes it more, the transient nature of it is far easier to ripple through the different schools. And also we've seen, for example, we had an independent school last year where there was every member of staff's computer got affected through a single email that was sent out through a distribution group of all staff with a PDF attached to it. So if you have if an attacker compromises the email platform that you use and then uses an account to send an email to all staff with a PDF attached, you then have every computer and every account across the school or across the trust that'll be impacted. And basically that means that every member of staff has to hand back in their device. Their device will be wiped, so everything that's stored on the desktop on the local drive would be lost. And obviously there's the disruption around that as well. If there's personal data or on that device that's not stored or backed up, that is really important to the operations of the school, such as safeguarding information or other information around behaviour, then there may be a further security incident and another data breach that would be reportable to the ICO, because as an organization, you're expected to sort of understand the impacts, such as these that we are describing. You're supposed to forecast these given how your IT systems are set up. quantify what the risk is, and then take preemptive mitigating actions to reduce the risk. And the preemptive mitigating action would be, sorry, staff, you cannot store anything on your desktop or on your local drive. Everything has to be within Google or Office 365, because then that manages your overall security risks and your ability to bounce back from a major malware attack.
I mean, that example you say sounds horrific. I mean, having to manage surely the logistics around that of everybody's individual device. I mean, that must be a huge piece of work. How many have you seen have just paid the ransom? And or what I don't know if it's called ransom's the right word, who just pays the money? And actually, are there any guarantees that they haven't left something lurking somewhere? Is that a risky game to play? Are people paying it? Do people never pay it?
Yeah, there was one college that we were working with the police, given the malware incident, and they asked for $50,000 worth of Bitcoin. The college then paid that, and then 2 days later they came back and asked for they paid it. So okay, we paid it now, and the ransomware said, oh, actually no, we want £75,000. So then they paid another £25,000, and then they came a third time and said, actually we want 100,000. But luckily for the college, someone within the cyber gang inadvertently sent them the de-encryption key, before they actually paid that additional money. So what you will find is they are trying to test your willingness to actually to hand money over, and your willingness to give money over not only plays into the hands of the cyber attackers because they're asking more money, but it sets a precedent against your peers in other multi-category trusts. But also, it also sets you up for being hacked again. The attacker may leave a payload that you don't identify because you don't do your diligence. You just feel that you paid the money and it's been dealt with. But in actual fact, you've got a payload sitting somewhere else that they'll execute in a couple of months' time, and then you have the whole exercise to that repeats itself. And those, when it comes to privacy law, is that there'll be organizations that are deemed to be willfully negligent that pay money to an attacker, then get hacked again because there's a payload already existing there. They then have to pay the money again, report themselves to the ICO again, and it's those organizations that are going to be fined to make it unattractive for other organizations in the future to be paying the fines. It's more cost effective to spend a couple of £1,000 on looking at what your cyber risks are and then seeking to mitigate those than paying $50,000. And the fines, and the most recent one I saw from multi-category trust, where they were asking for £2.5 million of Bitcoin.
I mean, I remember. I mean, you've obviously banged this drum for some time. You've been aware of the risks. You've been in this world for it, so you see it. You've seen it disproportionately from the average Joe. But it is frightening how quickly those trends are escalating. I mean, 60% of all malware attacks being education. I mean, that there's something happening if people are seeing actually education as a soft touch. And I imagine with multi-academy trust, if they start to understand what a growing multi-academy trust looks like, there's an extra weakness there with adding on a steady flow of new schools. So it is something that
if we can't compromise any of your multi-academy trusts, it's like, I can guarantee that every single FD who's listening will be able to compromise your systems within a day, probably less than 4 hours, and be the administrator to take control over all your IT systems within a day, but probably 4 hours.
There's a challenge. Anyone wants to get in touch with Mark? Any IT directors listening, bring it on, Mark.
Yeah, but that's the concern, and what you'll find is, so we have found many IT directors and said, yeah, bring it on, Mark, and we've gone in and we've done it. But we haven't done it through the usual, okay, we've gone in through someone's PC, we've gone in through a printer, we've gone in through a switch, we've gone in through the building management system, we've gone in through the CCTV system, we've gone in through access control, we've gone in through a Windows Server 2003 that you didn't realize was on the network, or a QNAP that the media studies are using to store their media files on. There are so many different ways in that a typical director of IT wouldn't necessarily be aware of how we get in, and those are the those are the areas of concern. It's these peripheral systems that aren't necessarily core, but actually have a gateway into the core network.
So I mean, obviously we wanted to highlight this because I've had conversation with a number of CFOs that are, obviously rightly aware and concerned about what's happening. So we wanted to put this on just to shed a bit more light, give people a bit of an understanding of what it looks like and what they can do. But also we're sponsoring a webinar. So you're going to put on a webinar for us, Mark, in May. I think there is a date in May. It will accompany this post, but we're doing a webinar in early May. And
Yeah.
what's that going to cover? Just this in a bit more detail? Is there any
Yeah, we'll cover off this in a bit more detail. We'll have our lead security consultant on taking us through what we typically find in terms of the vulnerabilities, where we find them, how you can reduce the risk. But also we'll give you an overview of what questions you should be asking your cloud service providers, such as IMP.
IMP.
IMP, sorry, IMP, such as IMP, around the security protections they afford to your systems and services. So many trusts are going to cloud first, and whilst you are hosting on someone else's server on someone's data center, you have a responsibility to understand how they build the code, how they develop the code, how they test their code, because that is where your risks reside. So we'll touch upon how we do that with the 9 app, and that'll give you some context around the questions that you can be thinking of, or certainly asking of your IT team, that they need to be considering when looking to go for any cloud service provider, across the operations of the trust.
So is that for CFOs? Should they be getting their IT teams on board? Who's it really geared towards?
Yeah. I think there are two things. We'll touch upon the document from the NCSC and the Academy's financial handbook. So definitely for CFOs. We will touch upon the output that a CFO should be looking for from its IT team in terms of evidencing the cyber risks. Because being the sort of the highest levels of management, say within the organization, that has the keys over the resources, you're the one who has to justify to the ICO why the resources for cybersecurity haven't been in place and the extent of those. So I'll give you an example of what you should be looking for from your IT teams, and then we'll go down into some more detail that will give you an awareness of the cybersecurity threats without having to understand, all the nerdy aspects of IT.
Brilliant. Thank you, Mark. I'm going to be spending the next 2 hours checking my antivirus, my printer, my Windows Server 2003, and anything else I have.
It's too late, Will. I've just emptied your bank account while we've been talking.
It wouldn't have taken long. Well, anyway, thank you very much for joining us, Mark. It's been really interesting.
Pleasure.
We'll put the details to the webinar out with this. And how can they get in touch with you at 9, Mark?
So they can go to the website, www.9ine.com. They can email me, mark.orcherson@9.com. We have a YouTube channel, loads of interesting videos there on cybersecurity. Connect with me on LinkedIn, or just drop an email to info@9.com. So a whole range of different methods.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Mark, and looking forward to the webinar.
Yep. Cheers, Will. Cheers, everyone.